Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room Update. We are on day 109 of the war, and yesterday was unfortunately probably the most lethal day of the war until now, apart from the 7th of October itself, as regards Israeli soldiers. Unfortunately, during the events of the last 24 hours, we've lost over 20 soldiers in a number of different events. 21 of them plus being killed in an event where a building in which they were fighting from was attacked and then collapsed on them. That a very, very hard news to receive today, but that's part of that fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the Khan Yunis area, that stronghold of Hamas, where the IDF forces have been operating now for over 2 weeks intensively. It is an area that is heavily built up. There are dozens, if not scores, of tunnels underneath the entire area, with tunnel shafts coming out all over the place, and truly endangering the forces in all of the area. In the northern Gaza Strip, we also saw an ambush of the Israeli armored troops there. That's an area where Israel had pretty much cleared out most of the terrorist activity, but then dwindled down its forces for all types of different reasons. And now we're seeing a resurgence of that terrorist activity, both in the central area on the Salah ad-Din Road, and also even in the western area towards the Al Shifa Hospital, and also in the northern areas of Jabalia as well. The fighting in general in the Gaza Strip is intensifying, with really the attacks coming from both aerial attacks, ground attacks, and artillery. The terrorists there managing to continue fighting and even to continue firing sporadic rockets, but predominantly mortars towards Israel. In the north, on our northern border with Lebanon, we've seen a continuation of the fighting going on as well. Yesterday, Israel targeting Hezbollah terrorists, and then Hezbollah responding. We're still talking about extensive destruction in all of the Israeli cities, towns, and villages along that northern border, and a continuation of that fighting. Hezbollah has now admitted the death of 163 of its terrorists in the different attacks, and the Israeli forces are continuing to operate both in Lebanon, on the areas that are adjacent to the border, and deeper inside Lebanon itself as well. Also attacks going on and directed at Syria and into Syria, with the Iranian forces also amassing in that area, the Iranian militias, the Iranian-backed militias, trying to really expand the scope of the conflict on the entire northern border, at the same time as operating through the other proxies, through Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Houthis are also part of that axis of evil in Yemen. There yesterday, attacking another US ship and really interrupting that whole freedom of navigation. Yesterday, we saw the addition of the European Union to that coalition of forces fighting against the Houthis, and really for their own best interests, not necessarily anything to do with Israel, but rather the Houthis are interrupting that freedom of passage through the Horn of Africa, leading up to the Suez Canal and then into the Mediterranean and straight to Europe. This means that every ship going towards that area has to almost redivert and go all the way around the African continent instead of cutting through the Suez Canal. That obviously will have a tremendous impact on all of the goods, commodities that are going to Europe. And so really there is a combined US-European interest in making sure that that threat to the freedom of navigation that's posed by the Houthis is removed to the greatest extent possible. Yesterday, even attacks to the north and the south of the Yemeni capital. In Judea and Samaria, I've seen the continuation of the attacks carried out by the same terrorist organizations from Gaza that are operating in Judea and Samaria, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and Mahmoud Abbas's El-Aqsa Martyr Brigades. All of those terrorist organizations really trying to continue on and support the activities going on in the Gaza Strip. In Israel, we managed to maintain the relative calm, at least from terrorist activity within Israel that doesn't come from the aerial bombardments, and so that's something which I think is a positive note. What we're going to discuss today with our special guest, with Yoni Ben Menachem, is another idea. There have been on the table a lot of discussions about how this process, how this war with Gaza should end, with the US administration really promoting a subject that's been discussed much before, this idea of a two-state solution. Now, what exactly is that two-state solution? How it would manifest itself, who would be on the other side, is something which is entirely unclear, whilst this idea, this maybe catchphrase is being bandied around. I don't think there are many people who really understand what we're talking about. So together, Yoni, maybe we can discuss some of those subjects. I mean, just as a contrast, we saw the idea of the Oslo Accords, which gave birth to the Palestinian Authority, never really discussed a Palestinian state. There were subjects that were left open for the final status agreements, and that was one of them was borders, the refugees, Jerusalem, the settlements, the Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria, and at the time also in the Gaza Strip. All of these things were left open. What was the nature of this body that was created, the Palestinian Authority? The Oslo Accords were very clear. It is not a state-like body. The fact that the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, has breached almost every single one of those provisions, it doesn't detract from the fact that the agreement at the time did not talk about statehood. When Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's late prime minister, presented the second Oslo Accord, the interim agreement, already the substantial agreement of the two in the Knesset in October 1995, just a week after the signing of the agreement, he specifically said that I do not envisage any type of other state being set up to the west of the Jordan River. That has developed obviously over time into this idea of a two-state solution. Possibly the clearest example of what we're talking about was set out by the Trump administration with the plan that really did define what a territorial Palestinian state would actually look like and what jurisdiction they would have. But really, apart from that, when President Biden now talks about a two-state solution, Yoni, what is he talking about? Who's on the other side? Hamas and Fatah have been divided since 2006, 2007. Who on the other side? Who can we conclude this agreement with about the two-state solution? Were that to be the path that we were interested in taking, who does the Biden administration see as our partners in this discussion?
Well, let's dive into the details that or the developments that happened in the Middle East in the last few weeks concerning this issue of the two-state solution, which has a direct link to the war in Gaza. About 2.5 weeks ago, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, he started a tour in the Middle East. He visited a few countries and Arab countries. He was also in Turkey. And it seems that the Americans are trying to form a new deal to stop the war in Gaza. This is a larger deal, not only concerning the war, to achieve a ceasefire and to release the Israeli hostages. They're also talking about the political aspect, which is normalization between Israel and the Arab countries, and of course with Saudi Arabia. This is the most important thing, because Saudi is considered the leader of the Arab world. But in return, they want an Israeli commitment for the two-state solution and establishing an independent Palestinian state. This is a deal. It seems that the Biden administration is trying to take advantage of the war and the effort to stop the war and in order to extract from Israel, or I don't want to say blackmail, but they want to get an Israeli approval for the Palestinian state, something that Israel never agreed to. And the Secretary Blinken, he met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he presented this new vision of the administration to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu rejected it. He said, no go, we are objecting an independent Palestinian state. So Blinken returned to the States, and on January the 19th, President Biden and Netanyahu spoke on the phone for the first time after the last phone call between them was on December the 23rd. And they spoke for 40 minutes. And apparently this issue was discussed of the two-state solution, and the White House didn't say anything official about that, just that President Biden still supports this idea. But CNN reported that Joe Biden, when he talked to Netanyahu about this issue of the two-state solution, Netanyahu denied that he is against this idea, and according to the report of the CNN, there's a possibility that Netanyahu will agree for the two-state solution. This was on Saturday during Shabbat, and Netanyahu, when he was aware of this report, he denied it completely, and then on Saturday night, there was an official announcement that Netanyahu is saying that he's objecting this idea of a two-state solution or Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. But then when President Biden was asked by journalists about that issue, he said, no, I didn't hear about a complete denial from Netanyahu. And there is Netanyahu said that there is a ground to talk about this matter, because there are some countries, some states that don't have an army. And this can maybe apply to also an independent Palestinian state, which is, he was hinting that Netanyahu might agree for a demilitarized Palestinian state. So in Israel, Netanyahu is denying it completely. The Americans insist that there is room to negotiate, and that this is a possibility that Netanyahu might accept as part of the deal for ending the war and a normalization with Saudi Arabia, something Netanyahu wanted very much. So this is where we stand. And I'm sure that the Americans will not give up this idea. They will try to push it. Of course, Netanyahu faces difficult problems with the coalition because not only Bezalel Smotrich, from the Minister of Finance, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, Minister of Interior Security or Police Minister, whatever you call him, of course they object this idea, but also ministers from the Likud. They don't want to hear about such a thing because they say this is a prize for terrorism, and the experience that we have with the Palestinian Authority is that, or with the Palestinians in general, that any area that Israel withdrew from Gaza or from the West Bank and was given to the Palestinians, immediately they turned it to a base of terror against Israel. So this is unacceptable, especially after what happened on the 7th of October, the massacre of Hamas in the settlements around the Gaza Strip.
And so that's exactly it, Yoni. Whilst the Americans are discussing these all, I think possibly what they see as utopian ideas, have the Palestinians, let's put aside Israel for a minute, what are the discussions like with the Palestinians? Do they believe that some Palestinian leader would actually accept the idea of a limited state, a demilitarized state? How long do they think that would actually be a reality? How would they seek to enforce that? I mean, the Gaza Strip was meant to be a demilitarized area as well. There was meant to be no terrorism, no rockets, no terrorists there. And that failed miserably, even without a state. How do the practicalities of this American idea come into place? Throwing around ideas like a demilitarized state is all very well and good. What is their suggestion that we again have play into the idea of technological ideas and barriers that will support this idea of a demilitarized state? Who will control the borders? Who will ensure that it remains a demilitarized state? Who will prevent the Palestinians from creating these massive factories for weapons production that we've seen uncovered and destroyed in the Gaza Strip? Getting into those little details, how do the Americans see that playing out?
Well, actually, there's no change on the Palestinian side of the Palestinian stance since the year of 2000, after the failure of Camp David summit, headed by President Clinton and the participation of Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak as the Israeli prime minister. There's no change in the Palestinian position. Their position is that they want an independent state in the 67 borders, with East Jerusalem as their capital, and also the implementation of the right of return, which means that bringing 7 million Palestinians who live abroad to live in Israel and to live in the West Bank in Gaza. So this is unacceptable. And also, as for Hamas, Hamas objects completely the idea of a two-state solution. Just a few days ago, Khaled Mashal, one of the leaders of Hamas, he was interviewed on TV, and he said, no, we never accept this two-state solution. Palestine is from the river to the sea. And we accepted it only as a temporary solution, the two-state solution, but our goal is to, he said, we agreed for that to create a consensus with the PA and the Arab countries, but this is only a temporary decision because we believe in Palestine from the river for the sea, and this is our position. So there's no change in the Palestinian position, there's no flexibility, and also there's no any specific American plan. How do they see, what is the vision of the two-state solution? Supposedly Israel will agree to that idea. How do they see the Palestinian state? Like you said, what are the borders of this Palestinian state? Will it be demilitarized or not? Who will control the water sources in the West Bank? What about the settlements? What are the final borders? What about the refugee issues? There are many things that are vague and nobody knows. But what President Biden wants, he wants an approval from Netanyahu or a positive Israeli answer to this idea. And we have to remember that.
Yoni, we've lost you. Yoni, we've lost you for a minute. You seem to put yourself on mute. And these are the questions that we need to discuss all the time. Yoni mentioned the idea of the demand of the Palestinians that Israel retreat to the 1967 borders. That's the term that's so often used. It's important to note that there is no such thing as the 1967 borders. The 1967 borders that they refer to are really the 1949 armistice lines, which the armistice agreement specifically said. The Rhodes agreements from 1949 with Egypt, with Lebanon, with Jordan, specifically stipulated that these lines will never be seen as borders. That was a demand of the Arab countries because they refused to accept the term border, because it implied that on the other side there was a legitimate state. And so they were the ones who demanded the term and the lines never be recognized as borders. One of the great, I think, propaganda successes of the Palestinians is to really inculcate this idea of the 1967 borders, which are a complete misnomer. They never existed. So what Israeli facing and from the Palestinians is this demand that Israel remove the 700,000 Israelis now resident in Judea and Samaria, that that Israel agree to flood itself and be destroyed demographically and democratically by the Palestinian refugees. And this is the stance of the Palestinians. So how does, going back to that, Yoni, how exactly does the Biden administration see that? Do they agree? Do they accept the demand of the Palestinians that all of the refugees be allowed to flood Israel? What do they expect Israel to do? To buy this cat in a bag, where you're buying an abstract idea which really means the destruction of Israel without any details? How can any reasonable or even acceptable administration be able to push that idea without really fleshing out these ideas?
Well, all your questions are very good, but there's no specifics because they just we're just in the beginning of this dispute. There is a big dispute between Israel and the United States about this issue, and first we have to remember that most of the public opinion polls in Israel now in the recent weeks, there's a great opposition of the Israeli public to even hear about an independent Palestinian state, especially after the massacre that Hamas committed in the Jewish settlements near Gaza. And also, our experience with the Palestinians is very bad because Israel withdrew from Gaza Strip, evacuated all the settlements there. A few thousand Israelis settlers were evacuated by force from Gaza to give it to the Palestinians, and they promised us that they will turn the Gaza Strip into a new Singapore, and they will develop it and live with peace next to Israel. And what happened is after the Israel withdrawal, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. He made a coup d'etat. He expelled by force the PA, took over the Gaza Strip, and created a terror entity which is attacking Israel. And we see from 2007, after they took over until today, what they did in the Gaza Strip. You just look at the tunnel web that they built in Gaza underground in order to attack Israel, between 500 kilometers to 800 kilometers under the ground, full of missiles, rockets, explosive. So what they did is they turned the Gaza Strip into a big military base against Israel in order to occupy Israel. And they made the first move on October the 7th with this massacre of the Israelis. 1,200 Israelis were slaughtered by Hamas on that day. And it was just the beginning. Fortunately, the IDF, it took it a few days, but it managed in the end to push them back into Gaza. And then the Israeli army went right into Gaza, and it's still fighting for more than 100 days against Hamas in order to destroy this military infrastructure, this huge monster of terrorism. So really, it looks like a fantasy. It looks that, to me, anyway, this is my opinion. There may be people that will not agree with me, but it looks to me like something that President Biden is trying to hold on to something because of the election campaign in the United States to show that he has some vision for the Middle East. So he's clinging on to this old idea of independent Palestinian state. And as for Netanyahu, maybe he doesn't want to go into a clash with the American administration and with President Biden, who helped us a lot from the beginning of the war. And he may be saying to himself, maybe I'm just speculating, maybe he's saying to himself, there's a good chance that ex-President Trump will be elected, and then I will not, and it will not take a long, it's less than a year, and then the Biden administration will not be able to do anything with this idea of an independent Palestinian state.
So in the same way, Yoni, as this appears to be a question of the identity of the US president, although it has to be said that every US president since President Clinton has supported this idea of a two-state solution. Even President Bush, even President Trump, with his plan of the century, deal of the century, prosperity, that it did have this vision of a Palestinian entity that would achieve statehood given certain criteria. And that's really been the paradigm until now.
Yeah, but the Palestinians rejected Trump's plan. He was talking about a Palestinian state on the 70% of the West Bank of Judea and Samaria, and they rejected it.
Yeah, they've rejected so far every deal that's been suggested. Right. To what extent, though, is this also a function of internal Israeli politics? We've heard Prime Minister Netanyahu also moving in different directions at different times. There's the famous Bar Ilan speech from 2009, where he didn't entirely, to say the least, reject the idea of a Palestinian state. Towards the recent statements that you covered previously, on the one hand, but then you have people like Minister Benny Gantz. Where does he stand on this? Whereas Netanyahu appears to have, and many others appears to have, come out clearly and said, even in the reconstruction, the rehabilitation of Gaza, there's no place for the Palestinian Authority. I don't remember seeing an equivalent statement from Minister Gantz, who, according to the different polls in Israel at the moment, if elections were to be held, he could potentially be the next prime minister. Where does he stand on this whole idea of a Palestinian state? He seems to have been doing everything in the direction of implementing the US plans, whether it be creating bonded warehouses while he was Minister of Defense under the government of Naftali Bennett, to opening up the Gaza Strip. Let's just recall that the Gaza Strip, following even prior to, but definitely following the COVID-19 epidemic, had been predominantly closed, and it was Minister Gantz as Minister of Defense under Naftali Bennett who reopened the Gaza Strip to the entrance of what would then become hundreds of thousands of entrances from Gaza into Israel. So is this also a personal stance of the Israeli leaders?
Yeah, well, it's not a secret. He doesn't talk about it now, Gantz, but Benny Gantz, we know that from previous statements that he made, he supports an independent Palestinian state. Not only he supports an independent Palestinian state, he supports the division of Jerusalem, and that the Palestinians will have a capital in the eastern side of Jerusalem. So this is something very dangerous. I don't know, maybe he changed his mind after what happened on October 7th, but we didn't hear anything about that yet.
Is there any indication that he's changed his position, Yoni?
No. I think he's not changing his position. I think I heard personally. I heard it a few times from him, and especially the issue of East Jerusalem. This is something very worrying. In any case, the Americans are not. I think they are hinting. Let's put it like that they would like to see Netanyahu after the war stepping down from the Israeli political arena. They probably expect a huge protest wave of the Israeli public once the war is over, because of the failure that led to the events of the October 7. So maybe they are counting on that. But this position, agreeing to any sort of a Palestinian independence after what happened on October 7th, this is giving prize to terrorism. There's no doubt about that. That means that Israel surrendered to the Palestinian terror. So I think there is now growing opposition among the Israeli public. Nobody wants to hear about this possibility of an independent Palestinian state.
But really, that could be something in a position, if it is so personal and Minister Gantz is so supportive and really enjoys what appears to be enjoys the support of the Biden administration as well. Would that be something which, again, he could be led to implement as part of that relationship with the Biden administration?
Look, nobody can force anything on the Israeli public. This is a democracy. Israel is a democracy, and nobody can force anything on the Israeli government. And Netanyahu is very experienced. He had a very difficult problem when Obama was the president of the United States. There were a lot of disputes about this issue of the Palestinian state and about Iran. And Netanyahu did not surrender, didn't give in to the pressures of the American president. So now Biden even has less time than Obama because the elections in the United States will be within a year. And what Netanyahu has to do is just stall, just to gain time until the political picture in the United States will be clear, and we will see who is the next president. But I think that if there will be a lot of pressure on Netanyahu, he will just agree to talk about demilitarize the Palestinian state, but still, he's risking the stability of his coalition because Smotrich and Ben Gvir, they already made it clear that any discussion about a Palestinian, independent Palestinian state, there will be no coalition. And they will dismantle the coalition and the government will go to early elections. And I don't think that Netanyahu wants to do that. So this is where we are.
So let's just go back for a second, if I may, Yoni. We understand that the U.S. administration is trying to sell a little bit of what in Hebrew is referred to a chatul basak, a cat in a bag that we don't really know what it is. The Israeli side is predominantly, at least the Israeli public is very anti that idea of a Palestinian state. The Israeli politicians are possibly divided. Who on the other side would be the partner for this discussion? In the last elections, Hamas won. Hamas is the most popular organization at the moment in the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah party don't really represent anyone. So who would be our interlocutor on the other side?
Well, we talked about the principle of this new American initiative, but we know that one of the ideas is that they want to have revitalize the PA, a PA that will go under big reforms, and that means that they are trying also to push out Mahmoud Abbas, which is already 88 years old, couldn't deliver any solution for the Palestinians since 2005, when he became the head of the PA. So they're trying to find another candidate that will replace Mahmoud Abbas. Right now, there's nobody. They are putting pressure on Mahmoud Abbas to appoint a deputy to the head of the PA. But he refuses to do that because he fears that they are trying to kick him out gently, and they want him to transfer some of his authorities to the new deputy. So apparently they are trying to move Mahmoud Abbas from office and find another candidate that maybe will be a partner for peace talks with Israel, but I think that will find it very, very difficult.
So at the moment we have people like Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas, who reject this idea of a two-state solution. We have another idea of Mahmoud Abbas, who has already rejected multiple ideas of a settlement, including the suggestion or the offer of Prime Minister Ehud Olmert in 2008, which, as Saib Erekat said, would have included even more territory than the pre-1967 lines. There, the sticking point appeared to be the return of the return, in inverted commas, of the refugees. And so we don't really seem to have anyone to talk to who can represent the Palestinians on this idea. So whilst the US administration is piling a tremendous amount of pressure on Israel to agree, really in this dance, there doesn't appear to be for Israel a partner who could even represent the Palestinians on one side and into this type of agreement. So that seems to be missing. Now, on one of the more fundamental issues, do you see, Yoni, for the last 75 years, the Palestinians around the world really have been told, really it's been completely entrenched by the idea of UNRWA, that the Palestine refugees will return to Israel, that all these people who have been living in makeshift camps in Lebanon, where they're discriminated against, in Syria, where Bashar Assad killed them on whole, will eventually come back to Israel. Do you see a Palestinian leader being able to now stand up and say, you know what, I'm willing to accept a Palestinian state? Let's, even within the 1967 lines, let's assume that Israel will be willing to expel all of the Israeli citizens from Judea and Samaria. Is there a Palestinian leader that can give up on this idea of the right of return?
No, they cannot give up the right of return. And you have to remember that there is a UN resolution 194, which says that the Palestinian refugees have the right to return to their houses and their property. So they have what they call an international legitimacy. So they will never give it up. And this is the I think the problem, that it makes no difference who will be the leader of the Palestinians, who will be elected, whether it will be called Mahmoud Abbas or Ismail Haniyeh or Khalid Mashal or Marwan Barghouti. It makes no difference. There is no change in what is called the Palestinians' red lines. It's called in Arabic thawabit. This is the ideological principles of solving the Palestinian issue. There's no change. And actually, there's no difference between the PLO and the Hamas. The PLO, they're using nice words, but they also want to destroy Israel by stages. The first stage is to take the 67 lines in East Jerusalem, and then to implement the right of return and create a majority of Palestinians inside Israel. So this is their way, and Hamas, they're saying it very clearly. We want Palestine from the river to the sea, and there's no place for Jews in Palestine. So there's no difference, there's no change in the positions of the PLO, PA, whatever you call it, and Hamas. So it makes no difference who will be the leader of the Palestinians, because no leader can make concessions and change these red lines of the Palestinians.
So really, we do seem to be at a complete impasse where the Biden administration is touting this idea of a two-state solution that no one is really interested or wants. Neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians, each for obviously for their own reasons. The Palestinians haven't yet accepted the idea of a Jewish national homeland, and that would have to be implicit as part of this agreement, and that's something which has always been an obstacle on the way. Maybe that's something which would have to be worked out further. Now, you mentioned it on the way, Yoni, this idea of, and this has been also discussed by President Biden and by Secretary Blinken, the idea of a revitalized Palestinian Authority. Now, what do they mean also with that? Revitalized, as I heard someone saying, you get revitalized after you go to a spa and you have a massage. It's not talking about what the Palestinian Authority needs to undergo, either with its relationship with Israel or with its relationship even internally with the Palestinians, the corruption that's rife, the court system that's completely corrupt and has never worked. And I mean, just start with this idea of the PA payments to terrorists for murdering Jews and for other terrorist activities. Pay for slave. Exactly. Yeah. Shouldn't that be set as a non-negotiable term? You want to talk about a Palestinian state, let's say to the Palestinian Authority, as extend a little bit the Taylor Force Act and say, not only are we not going to give you money, but we demand that you stop incentivizing, that you stop spending $350 million a year paying incentives to terrorists. Is that a call that we're hearing from the Biden administration to Mahmoud Abbas, who really is the founding father of this really grotesque pay-for-slay program?
Yeah, well, this is you're absolutely right. What happened is that when the Americans told Netanyahu that they want the PA to control also the Gaza Strip after the war is over, Netanyahu said, no, I object that the PA will come there and control the area. And they said, why do you oppose it? And he said, because the PA is corrupt. The PA is encouraging terrorism. They pay the terrorists monthly salaries, and also they incite against Israel in the media and also in their education system. So the Americans said, don't worry, we will have big reforms and we will change the PA according to what you're saying. This will be a new PA, a revitalized PA that will not support terrorism, that will not pay salaries, that will not incite against Israel. Leave it to us. We will take care of it. And then when Secretary of State Blinken, he met with Mahmoud Abbas, with Abu Mazen, and he started talking to him about that, and about the reforms and stopping the corruption and stopping the incitement and the pay-for-slay system. Mahmoud Abbas simply rejected his request. He wouldn't agree to anything. And Secretary of State Blinken, he left the meeting with Abu Mazen very upset because he didn't succeed in achieving anything. So now, even the idea is revitalize the Palestinian Authority is not realistic because they oppose it. And the Hussein Sheikh, one of the closest person to Mahmoud Abbas, who is the General Secretary of the Executive Committee of the PLO, he said the Americans are trying to interfere in our internal affairs, and we will never allow that. So I think there will be no revitalized PA because Mahmoud Abbas will never agree for that.
So now you've really entirely confused me, because whilst they clearly understand that it's impossible to have an entity alongside us, any entity, let alone a state, that actively rewards terrorism against and the murder of Jews, and they understand that the Palestinians reject even that very, very, very basic requirement, they still seem to be pushing this idea of, again, what appears more and more of a cat in a bag.
I think they're doing it, I told you, for political reasons, because of the elections in the United States for the presidency. I think they want just to show the American public they're trying to push some sort of a vision for the conflict in the Middle East. But look, President Biden is very experienced in the American politics. He was a senator. He knows the Middle East very well. He knows this issue of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict very well. He knows this is not realistic. But still, he's trying to push it for political reasons. I think so, yeah. This is my opinion. He's trying to promote this idea because of the election campaign.
The last one, if I can ask, Yoni, just really a 2-second answer, a short answer before we are forced to close the briefing. We've talked about the American idea. We've talked about the Israeli idea, split as it may be. We've talked about the Palestinian rejectionism. What about the Arab states? Where are they? We haven't seen this massive call, marches on the streets to create a Palestinian state and implementation of the two-state solution. You mentioned that Secretary Biden had met with all these people, but surely all of these other Arab states also understand that a Palestinian state is just not viable.
Of course, it's not viable. They know that. And they are very worried. I think they're very worried that once there will be an independent Palestinian state and there will be free elections, that Hamas will come to power again. And as you know, the Hamas is a part of the Muslim Brotherhood movement, which is considered, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, it's considered a terror organization. So, they objected the rule of the Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas because this is in danger for the Arab regimes. So, of course, they will have to say when they're asked by the Americans, of course, we demand the Palestinian state. This is the solution. This is the right way in order to show Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinians that they support this idea. But I think the Arab leaders deep inside are against this idea because they know what will happen if there will be an independent Palestinian state. It will turn into a Hamastan again, and it will be a nightmare for the Middle East.
On that, unfortunately, on that particularly bleak assessment, Yoni, we have to unfortunately end today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for clarifying as much as possible these different approaches of the different people to this idea of a two-state solution. Thank you to our audience for joining us again for these briefings. We will be back with you again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Israel's time, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can follow our programs. For those of you who don't already know, you can follow us also on YouTube. You can get to our YouTube channel via the JCPA, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs homepage. At the top on the left-hand side, there is the icon for our YouTube page, and you can follow us and subscribe there, and you'll be able to join these briefings also through YouTube. In the meantime, everybody, keep safe, and we will see you again tomorrow. Yoni, thank you.